Welcome to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. I'm Jess, a marketing exec, chief jargon buster, and I help ground AI in your practical day-to-day.
And I'm Kyle. I live at the intersection of data, product, and strategy, and I do my best to turn the technical AI chaos into something you can actually use.
We go beyond the overhyped headlines and give you the unvarnished truth about AI, what's real, what's hype, and what actually matters for your business.
Every week, we simplify the complex, spotlight the risks, and give you practical tools to make smarter decisions as the landscape rapidly shifts around us.
From agents to commerce to prompt engineering and vibe coding, we deliver honest insights, actionable strategies, and zero gatekeeping.
Let's dive in.
This is Early Adopter. Welcome back to Early Adopter, the podcast where we help make AI your unfair advantage. Welcome back, Kyle. We've had a long break for the holidays, so it's nice to be back on.
Hey, Jess. Yeah, it's been a long time. I know we still talked a lot over the break, but it was nice to have our respective time off to kind of regroup.
Yep.
And travel a lot, spend some time with family, do all sorts of stuff.
So much family time. My family came over from the States and I had them here for almost 3 weeks, I think, which, yeah,
it's a long time.
It was a long time. We had a lovely time, but we did a lot. Like, we were just constantly busy and doing touristy things. And sometimes it's nice to be a tourist in your own city, but like, I was really hoping for kind of a calm, chill break over the holidays but we got to go to the Cotswolds, which is in the countryside. It's absolutely beautiful. How was your break?
Yeah, mine was great. Also some family time, and then went to Alaska.
Yeah, how was Alaska?
Alaska was amazing. Very, very cold.
I mean, fair.
One of our last days there, we did dog sledding, and it was minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 30 degrees Celsius for all of our different audiences.
Nope. I mean, I'm sure it was beautiful, but nope.
I had thermals, I had toe warmers and hand warmers, and they still gave me like an extra jacket. And honestly, it's that cold where like I would bring my hand out to like take a picture with my camera, and like my fingers would just start getting numb and tingle, and then like you couldn't get feeling back in. It was wild. It was wild. But yeah, so the trip was amazing. Did some snowboarding, took a helicopter ride to a glacier.
Wow.
Said I'd never do a helicopter ride.
I was going to say you could never pay me to get into a helicopter, but you survived clearly. So
I survived. It was a great experience. So it was awesome. So yeah, really great trip.
Amazing. Well, let's get straight into it. On today's episode, we are bringing back our friend Rich. This is the episode that we were going to do pre-Christmas, but it got sidetracked by the Disney IP conversation that happened, which was obviously a really big one. That was an interesting episode, so go back and listen to that. So we are bringing our friend Rich Welsh back on to talk about the AI bubble. So let's get into it. Rich, welcome back to Early Adopter. We're so happy to have you here again.
Hi, Jess. Hi, Kyle. Thank you for inviting me back. Obviously, I didn't do too bad a job last time.
No, good enough that we wanted you back on. How are your holidays?
Very good, thank you. Yeah, lots of family time, lots of visitors, and although I felt like I needed a holiday afterwards, that's always the way.
Literally just said that exact same thing, and when we recorded our intro earlier today, so I get it.
The holiday from the holiday is
on the plus side with holidays. I personally find it's a good chance to catch up on a load of books I wanted to read, so I did.
Nice. Very nice.
A few interesting AI related sort of things.
Well,
I don't know if do you do a book club section?
No, but we should. That would be really interesting.
Rich, what's your recommendation? Anything we should check out, or anything our audience check out?
A couple of really good ones. So the one that I am still working my way through, but I'm really enjoying, is about spatial intelligence, and that's called The Infinite Retina. Very interesting book, very recent as well, which is good. I think last year or 24. And the other one, I think, take with a pinch of salt. I'm quite cynical and I'm definitely paranoid, but I do really like this book because it reinforces some of my existing concerns. But the book's called If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. And I don't know if that's quite a famous one. And it's the case against super intelligent AI. But it's a very good structured argument for some people who were on that big list of people who signed the charter about, AI companies being careful about building such things. And a very good read, but obviously, if you if you're already paranoid,
yeah, maybe
it's not going to make you
not
better.
Well, I actually think that this is a good segue into our topic today, because today we are talking about the AI bubble. Is it real? Is it hype? Is it nonsense? What is it? All of that good stuff. So, Rich, do you want to remind our listeners what your background is and why you're a good person for us to talk to about this?
Well, I don't know if I can justify the second part, but I can certainly tell you my background. So, yeah, I've been in the media industry for a little over 25 years. Started out in engineering and product development, mainly focused on software in the product development side. I have done a couple of startups, so I'm currently on my second one now as a founder. I was a founder and CEO of the first startup, which I sold in 2021. We were developing machine learning tools, so AI as it would now be, tagged from a marketing point of view, back in 2017, actually. So we were developing some stuff for the studios around image processing. And I subsequently did a lot of AI work, implementation, working with both external AI companies, the company that acquired mine, which was Deluxe. So I worked with AppTech, who are a large language model and language AI company. They do a lot of government work and so on. They're not the kind of company you would have necessarily heard of in the media space, and not probably up there with the big LLM companies, but they do develop that sort of technology. And I recently left to pursue more kind of venture capital investment. So I'm a technology advisor for a VC fund. I'm also an investor in that fund. And I have a startup, and I'm kind of keeping my finger in those startup pies. I'm just looking at whether I, look at some other areas to go, but I think it would be really hard to not do AI because it's such an essential part of business now.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well,
Hence why I think a bubble is quite a scary thing, because if it becomes critical to your business and there's a bubble, what does that mean for people? And I think the implications are pretty wide ranging, and they're going to impact everybody in every part of their lives, actually, if there is indeed one and it does burst. So I'm really excited to explore that with you guys today.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting, and maybe we can talk a little bit about this in terms of what's the perception, because I find that I think a lot of investors that I speak to are generally kind of torn around, is it a bubble? Is it not a bubble? I think those concerns are mounting, especially obviously the .com era is like the biggest example of that. And so there's a lot of parallels that we see. The MIT study is often quoted, right? 95% of organizations with AI projects seeing zero financial return. So that lack of ROI, I think, is really pushing that narrative, that the perception that we might be towards a bubble, that this isn't quite working. But at the same time, I mean, we really are seeing some incredible use cases and really some great technology coming out of this, some great productivity unlocks. So many people are using ChatGPT, and not in the way of like, I hate to throw this out there, but not in the way of like, oh, I bought some crypto and I'm interested in it, but like an actual, here's how I'm using AI to improve what I'm doing in my day to day, or small businesses being able to level up and be way more sophisticated than they might have otherwise been to start to compete with large enterprises. So we see so much, I feel like there's a groundswell of people doing quite a bit around this. At the same time, we see a lot of the big, narratives around so much money's being thrown into this. It's never going to make money. All those bubble concerns. There's no ROI in a lot of these projects. So be curious, Rich, what are you hearing, or maybe what's your perspective from that investor lens of, we're hearing a lot of these high level narratives around not seeing ROI, but, all of us here really feel that groundswell of what people can do. And it's really interesting. How do you factor or compare those two narratives?
I think if I start off by looking at how you might deploy various bits of AI to add value, especially as a startup or a small enterprise, I think it is very powerful, because exactly as you say, it allows you to automate processes that otherwise would require people to scale. Now, there isn't a substitute for people in a lot of places, but in terms of an example would be workflow automation. Building workflow automation used to be pretty tricky, and actually, it was something you sort of had to do on a case-by-case basis for different customers. So if you're a startup, effectively you're talking about an integration project per customer to automate something that probably every customer is doing. They might all be doing it a little bit differently, but they're effectively all doing the same tasks. And to automate for them was quite a big deal. And if you suddenly got 4 customers all wanting that integration project, that was something that you might find hard to scale for as a small business. Now with agentic solutions, that is not necessarily the case, and we definitely have used it in Volustore, the startup I'm currently working on, where we use it for back-end automation. We have agents running to do what would have been otherwise quite manual task-based post-production workflows effectively to automate, these multi-step, multi-process. So there's like parallel processes and then linear processes, and getting agents to decide which ones to do and how to do them, and how to feed all the parameters through those processes allows us to build an automation pipeline that would have been just like, honestly, a few years ago, impossible to do. You'd have just been doing it on a per job basis.
Right.
So there are advantages, massive ones. And I hate buzzwords, and agentic is the big buzzword. I think that might change this year, but we'll see.
No, that was a
But right
big
now, it's a big
2025 buzzword for sure.
I was going to say,
Yeah, I
let's put a
think
pin in that, because
2026
I want to
we
hear what
could.
your buzzword for this year is going to be.
Oh yeah, well I'll save that for a little bit. We'll
Okay.
come back to that
I'm going to make a
later.
note to save that.
Keep you on tenterhooks.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I do think there's genuine value in it. Now, the challenge there is, well, firstly, it's very buzzy. And secondly, there are a lot of companies going out saying, look, all these things we've done. Now, the people selling AI are very quick to tell you how powerful and important agentic workflows are, because actually, it can achieve quite a lot. But if you're a business that's like kind of gone in, especially the larger businesses going into that and then trying to deploy them in your business, it's just not that simple. If you're a little nimble startup and you know exactly what you're trying to do, very narrow problem space, in terms of what you're trying to solve, then, that, to be honest, it's just easier to do. And if you're an individual, building your own agents to help you in your day to day is also something that's achievable. For a large scale business, it's a very different proposition. And I'm not saying it can't work, but it is a much bigger hill to climb. So this, kind of that's where I would say as an investor, you're balancing very much that challenge of what a big business is doing with this technology and what little startups and smaller enterprises doing with it. And where should I be putting my money? Because I'm not saying big business can't do it. And actually, realistically, the bigger question is the stock market and how heavily leveraged it is on these bigger companies versus all the little startups who aren't even traded. They're not IPO'd. I mean, they may not even, like, they might be seed, not series A or B. So you're now trying to choose, how do you invest into something that's very early stage? I would always look for AI. I don't think it's essential for a good startup. There are lots of other very exciting areas of technology you might want to invest in. But I generally am looking at least to see what their stance on AI is, and especially seeing successful deployments. Then there's the question of building your own AI, and that's another conversation entirely, but maybe we tackle that one separately. So there's definitely a balancing act, but to my mind, there's obviously risk, but there's a better ROI, I think, in smaller companies who can deploy these things more easily than the larger ones. And the risks attached to the big companies are going to do a lot of damage to all sorts of economic mechanisms if they go. So that being a bubble is the most scary thing from my point of view.
Yeah.
I don't think that bubble bursting would immediately impact all the startups and small businesses out there. It's going to make it harder for them to get finance because people's capital reserves suddenly get destroyed because all the big, if you look at like how heavily Nvidia impacts pension funds and, large stock portfolios, it's
Massive.
insane.
Yeah.
If they just disappeared tomorrow, 60, 70% of value would be wiped out of a lot of those portfolios. And that is a really big problem.
If you look at the return in the stock market over the last year or two, it's almost completely driven by Nvidia. And then, to a lesser extent, still very like AI focused stocks. Because you can say now that Microsoft, Apple, Amazon are very much AI, at least their growth stories over the last year have been very AI driven. So if you take that as a grouping and you remove that from like the S&P 500 returns, there's almost been very little growth. So yes, if that were to go away, all of a sudden the stock market looks very, very different. I think one other thing that you mentioned, and I'll actually quote the Hugging Face CEO, he's on record saying that spending hundreds of millions is considered frugal in AI when, others are spending billions of dollars. So I think there is a real disconnect between, what people are spending and the earnings and kind of the return that people are getting. So I definitely think that lends some credence to this AI hype bubble. But I think you bring up a really good point, which is if that were to burst, and I mean, none of us have the crystal ball, but let's say if that were to burst or at least slow down, maybe to use margin call's great analogy of like the music stopping a little bit, how quickly does that impact small businesses? It maybe doesn't unless, let's say, for instance, OpenAI, if that were to burst, because there is a big disconnect between their earnings and their capital and how much they have. If they were to burst and they were no longer available and you didn't have access to those models, that would have a very quick impact.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting point, because if they collapse financially, would those models go away? No, someone's going to buy them and sell them, right?
Yeah.
There is going to be somebody out there, it doesn't kind of matter who, some large industrial corporation is going to be able to go and buy that infrastructure and infrastructure commitment, let's say, and the software, effectively the underlying IP, and continue to sell that. So I don't see a world in which like ChatGPT it becomes unavailable, and those, or Claude or whatever. And I mean, well, we should come back to Google specifically, because I think that's a very interesting anomaly in this particular bubble scenario.
Right.
My view is that it's more like frothy, like bubble bath frothy, where you get some big bubbles, but also there's a lot of smaller bubbles.
Yeah.
And I think what we'll see is some of those bubbles bursting. So I think confidence in investing large amounts. So like say, I remember, who was it who just got was it 250 or 350 billion valuation and raised 10 billion on that of cash?
Was that Anthropic maybe?
Anthropic.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And this was just last week, right?
Yeah,
so they've revised their valuation. So they've raised 10 billion on a 250 billion valuation. So, I mean, the thing is, if you're saying, well, my company's worth £250,000, can you give me 10,000? You're like, yeah, sure. Like,
pocket
no
change.
problem. And for the people at that level of investment, it's just more zeros. And I hate to say it, because I don't know if you saw The Residence, great crime thriller that was just before Christmas. I want to say it was on Netflix, but anyway, really, really great, like modern sort of murder mystery sleuthing thing. And there's just a great line from someone in that show. They're like, someone says, where are you going to get the money from that? And they're so like, where does any money come from? It comes from another big pile of money. And, it's like, okay.
Well, actually, that's so true if you look at like, capital structures in the world. It's just larger pots of money to find, right?
Yeah. Just big piles of money getting moved around between all these other big piles of money. So yeah, it's kind of crazy in terms of that. But we probably aren't like, this isn't a finance podcast, right? But it is important because it will impact everybody. And unfortunately, again, to quote, was it The Big Short you were mentioning earlier? Like
margin call.
Sorry. Yeah, it's like the average person that gets impacted when these things go wrong. It's their pension funds and their savings and all those things and their house value and everything that you put in, and you have no control over that. Yeah. So it's difficult to like reconcile being very pro technology and pro AI and wanting to encourage people to invest in the technology and, build businesses based on it and really lean into it, knowing that on the other side, there's this huge risk attached, that's societal level risk. Is it morally acceptable to be dabbling in this stuff, let alone any kind of like, apocalyptic kind of AI prediction? Just
for sure.
Just the economic impact of the big players in AI having a bad day tomorrow is quite worrying, I guess.
One other scenario, not to doomsday, but one other scenario that I'll throw in, just if with a lot of these AI pilots stalling, or a lot of these startups kind of over promising and under delivering, that level of kind of that investor with, if they don't have the returns, or if they just kind of get disillusioned overall with some of these AI projects, we could also see kind of a drought of investment, right? So investment has been massive in the space, but maybe we just start to see that investment slowing down at a time where I think it's really important to be experimenting and innovating in this space. So that also could have, that would probably, I'm not sure how much you would see it, how noticeable it would be. It'd be much more subtle, but I also think that could be, potentially dangerous or harmful for the overall industry.
Yeah, I actually feel like investment tends to just move around rather than stop. People, particularly the larger capital funds, have to put their money somewhere. So they will move it around. And actually, weirdly, I think because there's so much hinged on these very large, extremely high growth companies, a lot of investment funds, particularly like family private investment funds and so on, are looking for other places to put their money. Maybe not all of it, but certainly some of it. And I think that is an opportunity actually for startups and for, early raises, Series A, maybe Series B, to go into those funds, because you're just offering some diversity of investment, and realistically, you're not necessarily open to the same control problems. Now, as you pointed out, there's the MIT survey from sort of middle of late last year where 95% of all projects fail. But if you dig into those numbers, I think actually there was 67% success if people just went and used outsourced or specialized AI tools. Now, those specialized tools are being built by smaller companies who have a very laser sort of focus tasks they're trying to solve. And that's where I've personally seen success and experienced success with developing AI, is when you know exactly what you're trying to do. You're not kind of just blanket trying to apply AI to everywhere and anything you can get your hands on. You're like, we need to solve this very specific problem and we're going to go do that. Startups, obviously, that's literally their bread and butter. It's finding a niche, narrow problem that someone hasn't satisfactorily addressed or just hasn't even been thought of yet, and solving it differently. That maybe that's not going to necessarily be AI, but when it is, it does actually kind of give you a shortcut in many ways to getting to a commercial solution. I'm amazed at the speed at which we, within the startup I work with, can develop new features and functionality. I'm seeing definitely timescales come down from months to weeks. And that development speed is, this is a very small group of very talented engineers. Of course, I would have to say that. But at the same time, realistically, they're not having to solve the same problems. Maybe if you're developing software, well, I know they're not solving the same problems that we were looking at 5-10 years ago. So it's really interesting to see how quickly you can get into those niche things and fix them. And I think the other thing to add there is, some of these problems are ones that people have been dealing with for a really long time in the same old, well, that's how we do it kind of a way. Those are super ripe for disruption because there's bound to be a better automated way to do it. And if nothing else, you can do it more cost effectively. And that is where there's always a win when everybody's in a tough economic environment. They're trying to save money. There's only two things people are interested in at the bigger corporate level, to my mind, right now, is save money, new revenue streams. Those two things are right at the top of the list, because effectively everything else, all of the kind of growth things, are very hard, again, because of the economic environment. Very unstable, difficult to get, huge injections of cash unless you're doing literally like the leading edge kind of AI work. And that in of itself is, as we've just said, a risky bet anyway. So yeah, if you're a smaller company thinking about what you're doing, solving those niche problems, particularly the older ones that people haven't bothered to tackle because they're a bit too complicated or, or they're boring. I love a boring problem.
Boring
they're the
problems
best ones to
are
solve.
the best. Yeah, well, those are the ones that make the most difference in people's lives.
There's a really interesting tension that you've identified, though, which maybe isn't, we won't go into too much. That feels like a VC podcast, but like you're saying, the cost to innovate or the cost to develop has drastically been reduced, right? And it allows you to solve more niche, more unique problems, which we're seeing really great. But that kind of is a little bit in tension or contradiction to some of maybe the traditional VC model where you needed capital to build something that was really game changing or innovative. And obviously, distribution has changed around that product as well. So the cost of a lot of these things has really gone down. And then you start to question or ask, where does VC money, where does it need to be deployed effectively? That maybe is a bigger conversation to be had, but it does create a bit of a tension in terms of where we're going.
Definitely. And I think it's interesting as well, looking at the VC that I'm involved with is US based. It's a Silicon Valley fund, and my startup is UK based. So we're working in a European investment environment effectively. So I'm kind of seeing both things. And, everyone from the outside looking in thinks, oh, Silicon Valley, you can like double or triple, the investment or whatever, because that just seems like that way. The numbers seem so huge there. But as you've said, like really the return on investment should be better now. I think one of the things that's worth kind of looking at, again, if you're in a sort of startup land or a smaller business, is the fact that there's a lot of government support available, particularly in Europe, in the UK and Europe in general. And that actually is an immediate win for an ROI for an investor point of view. Because if you're putting in, say, $1 million, but you're getting a return of 2.5 to 3 million of actual development work done because of a government grant that's topping up that investment. And they are typically, somewhere between 50 to 70, 80%. And there are some grants that are just clean 100%. Here you go. You're doing an amazing thing. We're going to give you some money. So, I mean, you don't need investment to get those, but typically to go after the other ones, you need some match funding, right?
Yeah.
And they are looking for investors to come in and even then there's tax incentives as well to be an investor in an early stage business, certainly in UK and Europe. So, and those grants do exist in the US as well. They're not quite as generous, I don't think, but they're there and they're out there to improve the ROI. So I think it's important to go looking for that, actually. I wasn't aware of it until probably halfway through my first startup journey, was that you could even go out and get these grants. And as soon as we knew, we're like going after them constantly because they were just such a great way of funding all that development work. And they're designed for
They
risk.
come with a lot of support too. I mean, it's not just the money, but there's support and all sorts of resources.
Kyle and I can talk to this personally because I don't know if you knew this, Rich, that we got an Innovate UK grant for.
Oh, did you? Congratulations.
Yeah, well, it was a while ago now, but we got it as part of it was during COVID.
Oh, okay, cool.
For one of our first startup. So we know that.
So we just got one last year for Volley Store as well.
So Rich, you are obviously coming from an entertainment and media background, as Kyle and I both come from an entertainment and media background. And obviously that is an industry that is being hugely reshaped by AI right now. And we did a whole episode with you just about a month ago on this exact topic. So, we're seeing studios making billion-dollar bets on AI-generated content, on tools for creators. We saw a number of announcements coming out of CES from Disney, et cetera, et cetera. So from where you're sitting, which of these bets actually look like real ROI plays and which look like they're very hype-based? I think you're very much you're talking to a lot of people, and I think you're kind of in the middle of this, so I think you'll have an interesting perspective, especially if we look at entertainment as kind of a proxy for the bigger picture.
Yeah, I mean, entertainment has some very specific sort of structural issues at the moment. Cost base is really a sensitive problem, and some parts of the production cycle that have previously been quite profitable are now finding that they're struggling just to break even. And it's partly as a result of the macro kind of economic conditions in the media industry, which is, due to all sorts of factors, like it's still a hangover from COVID, honestly, the current sort of turmoil in the stock markets, but also mergers, acquisitions, and strikes and things like that. So we've had a lot going on. And actually, I do want to come back to strikes and sort of artists sort of action, because I think that will have an impact in 2026. But right now, Gen AI has a lot of ability and a lot of promise to improve areas that have typically been quite costly. Like the visual effects space is definitely one of those where I don't think visual effects are going to be wholesale replaced by Gen AI, but I do think that it can fill in a lot of gaps and cost problems in that area. I think generative content overall still very interesting. There's now, bigger and bigger prizes for generative only kind of film festival type stuff. So it's becoming its own class. I think maybe that's where that goes. Within media and entertainment, you can just go after all of the same kind of business advantages that you could in any industry. I think the challenge has been that the stuff that people are focused on is all the creative work. And that in of itself is it's a tricky one because it's divisive. There's potentially bigger legal issues, as we discussed in the previous podcast. The same day that Disney announced their partnership with one AI company, they served this cease and desist to a bunch of others to stop creating or replicating Disney stuff, So there's a really complex legal environment around that. I think it's one of the areas where I'm going to literally think on my feet now and stratify the whole thing. There's going to be this underlying layer of processes that have always been happening or been happening for a long time, which can be subtly augmented with AI or maybe already employ AI and have been doing it that way for a long time. And they're just going to continue to be utilized and improved and become a part of the process that's indispensable. Like you wouldn't go back to doing it all manually. Rotoscoping is a really obvious example of that. That is painful. Nobody likes rotoscoping. May as well use an AI. And for most purposes, for most shots, great, do it, get away with it. If it's for a background or like a fly through a landscape or whatever, all works really well. And that sort of thing is that whole layer, very boring stuff that no one ever notices when they watch a movie, TV program, whatever. That I think will continue to develop. And that is where personally I'd be putting my kind of investment money.
Boring processes.
Boring stuff that no one notices. Well, the next layer up is the stuff that people start to notice, where it's actors recreating, their likeness and so on. Unbelievably sensitive. This is where I think there's huge amounts of concern around the kind of the copyright area. And I think like obviously with all the rights in place and all the monetization models looked at in terms of monetization for the talent, so how they get paid for the use of their likeness and so on, with all of that in place, great, that's fine. And that stuff is there really. There's a question mark around the ethical nature of that, like how are models trained? There's a lot more guardrails in now. If you just go and try and off-the-shelf generate copyright stuff, it's harder to do. But even then, like I was generating some images for a presentation today, and I was like, oh good, it's Iron Man again. It's all I can do to get a robot that doesn't look like Iron Man. And it's and I get why. It's like the most pervasive robot face on the internet. So it's hard to tune that out of your your model. It's impossible to tune it out, so now you've got to guardrail it out, and even that's not effective. So there's always going to be these problems around the ethical nature of what you're training your data on. So that middle layer to me is the one that's fairly shaky, and I would be more worried about putting a lot into. Then the top layer is monetization from a studio or a franchise level of your assets. And there, I think AI has a huge amount of promise. And this really speaks to what Disney is looking at with OpenAI, is ability to personalize an experience or customize content for the user with their franchise kind of characters, which then gives this great level of attachment for the customer. So I think that is a huge space. And then if you extend that out to like world building and so on, and that, well, I don't want to preempt too much, but that's something I think is worth us discussing a little bit today, although it could be its own episode. But yeah, I think that idea of like exploring worlds. Yeah. And I just saw Netflix acquired Ready Player Me, who allow you to take your avatar between games. And so already, and there's underlying abilities there with world building and metaverse, again, which will massively rely on AI to actually render out these things for individual experiences. That's barely scratched the surface of the opportunity there, I would say.
Well, I think last time we kind of alluded to, if not talked about, Ready Player One, and that's kind of where you're going to, where these metaverses, different IP that can interact with each other, right? Online, there's always been you can't have DC with Marvel, right? That's not the same universe. Well, getting towards an area where you start to have them actually play because you can personalize the content, you can cross over between worlds.
And even just exploring them, and who wouldn't, want like Superman to bump into the Incredible Hulk and see what happens? But that will be in the hands of the users, right? That won't be something that's like content for us to all enjoy. It'll be because you're in an environment, your avatar is a Superman avatar, and there's an Incredible Hulk avatar or whatever. So I think those things are going to happen for sure. Here's one of my predictions, 2026. It's a bit more of an out there one, but I think agentic, like that has to work now because a lot of companies have pinned their investment strategy and even like their HR strategy on those efficiencies, and they're going to have to prove that they can actually do it now.
Yeah,
that's a mid-level company or corporate risk, I would say, from a market point of view. But what I think will be replaced with is world models. So this is partly spatial understanding, and it's partly the context of what's happening in an environment, as opposed to what someone is articulating when they speak. We're going to move on from language models to world models. Now, this is a very long journey, but we're already doing it massively in the big use case is autonomous vehicles. Yeah. They have to have a sort of a world model of the space they occupy, which is roads, and where they're driving around on roads, and what's on, what are the traffic hazards and so on. So that has to be spatial, has to be contextual, has to be dynamic, has to be able to adapt to very unusual scenarios it hasn't experienced before. So it has to be, effectively like a generative model because it needs to be able to quickly navigate something safely. And we're seeing already the legal implications of this. And then, of course, at CES, Nvidia announced their tie-up with Mercedes. No surprise, really, that was going to happen. Nvidia, of course, need to make sure they've got the next thing and the next thing. And actually, Nvidia rolled out their world model. They showed the architecture for their world model. Very simple, actually, at this stage, to my mind, because a true world model is much more complex, I think, than what they've rolled out. But theirs would absolutely apply for something like a narrow task like drive a car. I think that's where we're going. And I do think agentic will give way to world models at some point. Maybe this year, maybe certainly next year, but even in the entertainment space, world models actually is something that filmmakers have known about for a very long time because they do that as part of filmmaking courses, like how to build a world and set your story in that world. So that's a different concept, but it's
world models is your buzzword for 2020.
Yeah, I was going to say
we'd go back to that, but make sure we pinpoint that. But and also for our audience, the world models that you're talking about with driving cars, it's not some futuristic thing. A lot of people have probably used Waymo, right? Waymo is a great example of that, which in my area I see all the time, but pretty common now in some of the larger cities. So that will continue to expand and be pretty popular.
And like any buzzword or buzz term, it's going to have a lot of things applied to it where it's only very loosely the case. I actually think, self-driving vehicles are probably the best example of a real world use case right now, but we weren't calling them world models 2 or 3 years ago. It was just the model that's inside that vehicle or whatever. Like AI used to be called machine learning. Before that, it was just called statistics, I believe. We're sort of going down that path of attaching it to things. Again, I think even autonomous vehicles really only scratch the surface of world models in terms of what they can be. And also, large language models are not the right, in my opinion, and not just mine. I was
going to say, I think this is, the CEO of Hugging Face says that it's not an AI bubble, it's an LLM bubble, which I think a lot of people
Okay,
would agree
yeah,
with
that's
that.
actually a
Yeah.
very good way of putting it.
Yeah. No,
LLMs are not, the answer to this. And
No.
I think for that reason, they're not really the answer to AGI either.
So Rich, I think when we're talking about bubbles, we kind of alluded to it before that there are some really good narrow use cases that are working really well. We've also talked about how there's a lot of money being spent. Where do you see the most disconnect from hype and reality? Where do you see the bubble maybe is more likely to burst? And I know you talked about big bubbles and little bubbles. What are some of the places where you think we're really disconnected from what we can do?
I think single model, like very large models being used in isolation to solve problems that are like business critical or mission critical is definitely an area that can be very risky because you don't really know when you're going to have a wild output from these things. And that wild output could have really like far-reaching consequences. That's definitely an area to be aware of when you're deploying. It's one thing using these tools to like do some work that is effectively end up being checked by people. I mean, this is the big question, right? Like, I'm trying to think, who was it? Klarna who laid off 750 people and then had to hire them all back.
Yeah.
And then
Klarna's the famous
Microsoft
one.
did something similar, but IBM, sorry, did something similar, but then it was like they didn't hire back the initial people, but they hired a load of new people to deal with all the AI that was like that they were now using to replace the old tasks. So, humans in the loop, I think this is where it becomes a challenge for businesses because this ROI question that's again, like this is like a macro level bubble problem that you can't achieve what you thought you could. And maybe you've already told the investors you can. And worse, maybe you've already taken the action as if that is going to happen because you can save money now and solve the problem later. But if you can't solve the problem with AI, now you've got a hiring issue. I think so. That's one area in terms of implementation. I think the other one that I found, did you see the report from Oxford Economics? They were saying that effectively hiring or the use of AI has been used by companies to get their investors to have more confidence.
Yeah, so it was an Oxford economics report, and it suggests that AI is not causing widespread unemployment, but that it's been a corporate narrative for job cuts driven by standard economic factors like overhiring or weak demand.
Right, and this is another area, a kind of very high level. If your kind of leadership believes that AI is going to fix a load of problems, and then you don't implement it properly, and again, maybe that comes back to the MIT study with the 95% of Gen AI projects failing. But I think that isn't really telling the truth about like serious development in this space. It's more like people unknowingly or unwittingly trying to use AI and not really understanding what they're trying to achieve with it. I think one of the other areas that another one from CES actually. So is it a bubble? I think it probably is. I think this is like a human interaction level bubble. So I think this one might drift into legislation challenges, is something I'm very passionate about. So I'll try not to go on about it, which is anthropomorphism and the idea of imbuing human-like qualities and intentions to AI and robots. Seeing a lot of robots at CES this year, humanoid robots.
Yeah.
And the justification for that is that they're doing human scale tasks, but we know they're terrible at it right now, like loading a dishwasher. Like if you were going to build an efficient dishwasher loading robot, it doesn't need to look like a person.
Right.
I'm sure there are mechanical ways to do that look great. And I'm not saying you shouldn't use AI in that robot, but why make it look like a person? There is no requirement for that. I don't object to robots to do boring manual labor tasks. And I like the comment someone said, it was like, I want you to like do my chores so I can be creative,
We
not be
literally just said
creative for
this.
me so that I do my chores.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
completely
I'm fully on board with that. I've got 3 robot vacuum cleaners. So
bring it back to the disconnect. Obviously, there's a big disconnect between, like we talked about a lot, the ChatGPT wrappers. Obviously, that was probably an overbaked segment. And I think generally speaking, and we've kind of talked about it, things that don't really have much of a moat, those are probably going to be segments that are affected. But that to me isn't a bubble. That's more of just where is the capital correctly being applied. And then to your point, I think you kind of talk about that. What is that capital allocation mix? And similarly, I think there are probably undervalued segments. There's places where we haven't spent enough money. So hopefully the industry, especially in 2026, will move and start to reallocate towards the things that are really kind of unique or solving, specific challenges and niches. But yeah, it definitely seems like maybe 2026, that the robotics industry is going to get a little bit of disconnect between hype and reality. We're going to see that play out in terms of like what's getting funding and what's not.
Yeah, I think so. I do think in terms of like just pure software solutions and solving problems in that respect, we will see a lot more effective use of AI. I'd be interested to see, we talked earlier about some of the bigger companies in the space and the impact of them failing, let's say. Like, I don't see Nvidia failing. They're way too embedded. They're not going to go under. I don't really see any of the large model companies failing at this point, maybe, but even so, you would still be able to get access to the model. I think what would be difficult for industry as a whole is if you've heavily pinned yourself on those models, now either the company running that model goes under and now someone else is running it, or that company continues to run it but needs to make more money out of it. And let's face it, the big kind of elephant in the room here is the amount of return for the investment that's already gone in, let alone the future investment.
Right.
And so at some point, my view is the prices have to go up, or, stuff that's free now becomes more expensive. The thing is that that's counter to what's typically happened. Prices generally come down. You find ways to be more efficient and you reduce the price of software services. I'm genuinely not sure what happens in the short term if all those prices go up. All the people who currently had tried to make their operations more efficient using it would suddenly find that it's like not affordable and you're going back to people and manual processes. That would be a bit of a disaster, right?
Well, we already
I'm
know
not
that
saying that's going to happen, but it's a concern.
We already know that they're looking at advertising. This is the route that all of these platforms go down, is advertising in some way, shape, or form. They've already seen, like OpenAI has basically admitted that they're going to start embedding ads.
Right. There we go. Well, and that brings us to Google or Alphabet more specifically.
Because they've had a very good week, haven't they?
Yeah. They've just overtaken Apple. So
exactly.
Well done them. But they're much more vertically integrated. Apple's a company that sits on, hardware really, and great hardware, well executed. Whereas Google's, across everything, search for a start. I mean, it's just insane. Think how much data they gather. Google's become such a massive source of truth for me. It's actually kind of worrying when you think about how deeply integrated they are across my life.
Also, Google have really, really stormed ahead with AI in a way that I don't think anyone expected. If you had said this time last year, hey, is Google going to be overtaking OpenAI? I think everyone would have laughed in your face. But now they are way up there.
Yeah,
and they have Gemini, but also they have the built-in infrastructure that OpenAI wants. Google already have it. Right. They can integrate AI within Google Workspace. They've just announced some Gmail stuff. There's shopping. There's like so many existing elements that they have access to that no one else.
70% of the smartphone OS.
Exactly.
OS
they just at CES globally. They just announced Google TV AI features. Like they can integrate it with so many spaces that no one else can access.
Yeah, and when we talk about world building, maybe it's not world building as such, but it's certainly building a very strong model of each individual user, which it can take massive advantage of. It's a type of world building.
It's a type of world building because they have their tentacles in
your
many...
world building.
Yeah.
It's building your world.
Individual
or it's understanding
building.
Your world very, very well.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, also there was the thing about Amazon giving all their delivery drivers like glasses.
That project, I think it was called Project Jaybird. It's basically their, no, they had a code name for it. It's basically their version of Meta glasses. Right now it's just for their delivery drivers, but eventually it will be rolled out for a consumer product.
And actually that Meta glasses and any of these other companies that are effectively trying to capture the real world with wearables, or again, even through autonomous vehicles and so on, like Google have been doing it for a long time with, Google Street View. They've been going around mapping our world for a long time.
Years.
Yeah. And so actually all that stuff does start to contribute to these world models. So I think this is going to be a really interesting area to watch. And actually, in talking about bubbles, I think the way to stop the bubbles bursting is to have another thing and another thing and another thing. And I think Nvidia know this, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, they all know this. And this is why I think world models will be big this year, because it needs to be the another thing that we have.
Sometimes I feel like with OpenAI, they're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, maybe.
No, I know they obviously have roadmaps and they've planned it all out, but sometimes it feels a little like, ooh, is this going to work? Is this going to work? Is this going to work? They have so many announcements every week.
I guess when you've really hung your hat on building general intelligence, you've got to try a lot of things.
Yeah.
Because what we have right now is not how we get there, in my view, and a lot of other people's view. So you've got to try new things, actually. So OpenAI, if they're really serious about building general intelligence, probably have to do a bit of spaghetti throwing, because kind of that's how it all started anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, going back to your Transformers example, right? We're trying something through getting against the wall and came up with the innovation that allowed for all of this to happen.
I can't tell you why, but I get real MySpace vibes from OpenAI. I have no reason behind this, but that is my vibe from them, MySpace.
That's bad investor outlook.
Well, exactly.
Sam Altman is the new Tom.
No, Tom is the smartest of all of the social media founders. He vanished off the face of the earth. He's just living his life quietly, doing his thing. So Tom really is what we should all aspire to.
So I think kind of bring it around, Rich, you're talking to founders all the time. For this group, where we're basically, our audience is a mixture of founders, business owners, AI curious professionals. Where should they lean in 2026 based on kind of all of these changes? Should they be more frugal, or should they be leaning in and really taking some, big targeted bets? What's kind of the typical conversation you're having with founders as they think about their strategy for 2026?
I think, first of all, just being very intentional about what you're doing in the space in terms of where you're investing your time and your energy and your money is just looking at those like problems that can be solved, that you're not trying to just boil the ocean. I mean, I know this is like general advice that you would always give to any startup,
right?
But I think the challenge with AI is it can do so many things. It's quite tempting to try and do a lot. And actually, if you do, I would say do a little, do incremental improvements using AI and build on that, because actually that can be done quickly, successfully, and all the little failures that you make along the way don't have huge impacts. If you try and pin yourself on a very big, complex problem-solving exercise, that's where the risk sits, I would say. I think there's an opportunity in terms of where capital is moving around. I think this is the moment to be doing startups, to be doing Series A growth, scale ups, because that money is worried about the stock market and there's no safe havens. So I would say startups and scale ups have a great opportunity at the moment to go out and show what they're doing that's very intentional, really leveraging AI and moving the needle, making a difference for bigger companies. For the larger companies, for the larger businesses looking to invest, go after the technology being built by the smaller companies, because that's where you can get your win. And that was what was proven out from the MIT research, was the in-house stuff was really problematic for bigger companies. Whereas when they went and got specific solutions, that's where they got the wins, the efficiency gains and the cost-based wins. So I think that's it really.
Yeah, and I would add to that, maybe this is my bias coming in, but also be very metric driven about these AI initiatives. So have a clear hypothesis. I think your advice and your overall view of being very specific and targeted to tasks that can really help. And then if you add metrics on top of that, you can be really clear on how well it's working or not. And then, like you said, experiment fast, maybe fail fast is always a pretty typical startup environment. You can prototype and fail fast with AI very quickly, as long as you take small, focused niche problems and then be really metrics driven around it.
And I think when you've got those niche problems, it's easy to know what your path, you can see when you're succeeding more easily.
Yeah.
With a bigger complex problem, you can spend a long time going in a certain direction only to find that wasn't the right one. With the narrower the problem, and again, to your point on metrics, look for proven success, existing success with, if it's not like customer, if you're not like getting like other customer kind of proof that this worked for someone else, that might be difficult with a very early stage startup, but just ask them for technical success. Show the roadmap of the things that they've been able to develop up to that point. I think going in for something where it's completely unproven, that's going to be super high risk.
Yeah,
obviously. I mean, it always is anyway with any technology, but in this case, it's very easy to say, well, AI can solve that because we see so many general problems being solved and so many places it can be applied. And there isn't really a limit to that. And I don't disagree with this notion from the big AI companies. AI has a place in every single problem you can imagine. And I really do think that is true. The fact that it's also got a place in a whole load of problems we didn't even know existed and probably have nothing to do with us is another story for another day. But it can be applied anywhere and everywhere. But building a company on that notion is not enough. Building or a solution on that notion, building it on solving a real problem that you understand you have domain expertise in. Again, those are metrics that are easily measurable. What's your domain expertise in the thing you're trying to solve? So you're completely right. Like, go for measurable indicators that let you choose the right thing to invest your money in and your time and your energy in.
And sometimes boring stuff is okay.
Boring stuff is the best.
Yeah.
Always go for boring. We should have like a boring index.
Yeah. The more boring or the more capital it should get.
Love it.
Yeah, it definitely should be a driver in your decision making.
Anyway, Rich, it's been a delight talking to you as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for letting me come on and pollute your space one more time.
I mean, hopefully, Rich, we get you a couple more times here in 2026.
I'm sure
I think
we will.
You'll be definitely our first call if any of the hype, disillusionment, any of the bubble talk starts to happen. We'll get you on an emergency podcast.
Oh my God, yeah. When the bubble starts to burst. Burst really fast, don't they? That's the problem.
Or separately, I think it's an interesting perspective that we'll talk about, this idea that there's just going to be more and more announcements to push the bubble out. That's also something that we should probably continue to monitor and talk about.
Definitely.
Cool. All right.
Thank you, Rich. Really appreciate it.
All right. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
So, moving on to our AI news of the week, CES just wrapped, and there's actually a lot happening. The mainstream narrative is all about robots and physical AI, which, yes, that's real for sure.
Yep.
But I think what we found really interesting is what the platforms are announcing. So this is the first time we're seeing infrastructure companies take AI off the pedestal and start to put it into the tools that small businesses already use.
I think this is kind of following up a little bit from our conversation with Rich because, we're kind of moving beyond the hype cycle and now moving into the actual practical usage side of things. I've been reading through the announcements and there's definitely a pattern, especially for me, more on the kind of marketing and advertising side. Disney announced a video generation tool specifically for smaller advertisers, which is really exciting. WPP, which is one of the biggest ad and media agencies, launched something called Open Pro, which is specifically designed for companies that can't afford their traditional 5K retainers. Yahoo is still around and still exists. They're embedding AI into their DSP, which is demand side platform, which is a media buying tool. Reddit is doing something similar with their ad platform. So we're really starting to see some of these features becoming baked into the actual platform itself.
Yeah, and I heard this from a couple people. That it's not this, here's this new AI company that you should take a look at. It's the platforms you already trust are adding capabilities. The way I heard a friend say, which is a little bit more of the maybe pessimistic view, which is everything you've already done before, well, now it has AI in it, right?
That's a good way of putting it. That is exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it's a very different distribution plan than we've seen in the past.
Yeah, I mean, everyone Yeah, it's a running joke, I think, at this point.
I think is the evolution we've been talking about rather than just ChatGPT wrappers. It's actually like, here's how these tools fit into your actual process. Here's how you can start to build some of those AI workflows that are actually going to probably help you and optimize what you're already doing. So I think it's starting to finally add structure on top of just the ChatGPT or LLMs that we've seen in the past. So CS is usually pretty hardware heavy. So on the hardware side, we can cover a little bit of that. I mean, obviously, Nvidia was big in CES.
Always.
Always, yep, but especially now. So they announced Rubin, which is their new GPU architecture, which they're claiming will have 10x lower inference costs. Definitely robotics is going to be a big conversation this year. And then Intel, which is obviously a chip manufacturer that you've probably heard of before, is positioning AI PCs as a major thing. I think the thing that's important to note is, unless you're building infrastructure or you're a company running really serious AI workloads, big companies that are really buying thousands, tens of thousands of GPUs, these announcements probably don't directly affect you.
Yeah, I think it's more of a signal than anything. So like the big players are really competing to make AI cheaper and faster to run, which is generally good for the overall ecosystem, obviously, but it doesn't really affect you as a business generally if, looking at what NVIDIA's GPU roadmap looks like. But what does change is the availability of tools. So a lot of this is not new technology, but it's kind of new packaging and new workflows that make it much more useful for smaller teams, which obviously is what we are particularly interested in.
But that brings us to the physical AI stuff. And everyone's talking about that. And obviously it can get a lot of headlines because of robots is kind of a fun thing to think about.
Everyone fucking loves a robot.
But it's not ready for most businesses. You see some really cool stuff online in terms of videos, but when you actually are there in the real life demo, you realize we've got a long way to go. There's a lot of investment in kind of propelling and pushing this robotic industry. But like we said, the actual deployments are still very narrow. So delivery robots, warehouse automation, some industrial application, but that humanoid robot that does your laundry and is, or maybe even like fully sentient, that's still years away.
That's all I want, though. I just want a robot to do my laundry.
Well, still my favorite joke ever is, AI was supposed to do my laundry, not to do my art.
Kind of in general, the roundup for CES is marketing and advertising tools are becoming way more accessible, which is obviously great. And robotics are real, but probably not super urgent. So those, I think, are probably the biggest headlines that we can say are coming from CES.
Yeah. And again, AI is moving from here's a bunch of new tools to here's how AI is embedded in the tools you already use, which is a great and helpful shift for everyone involved.
So this story came out before Christmas, and I have to talk about it because it's one of the most insane things that I've read in a while.
I'm scared, Jess, but
you should be. You should be for this one.
So tell me what happened.
So researchers have caught an AI-powered bunny, like a toy bunny, which is marketed for 3-year-olds. It costs, less than $100 on Amazon, having detailed sexual conversations with children.
Oh my God.
I know. So it's talking about bondage, kinks, things that a toy bunny should not be talking about.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So apparently
that's very disturbing.
Exactly. So the toy is called the Alilo Smart AI Bunny. And the worst part is this isn't even the first time that this has happened. This is the second AI toy in a month that has gotten caught doing this.
Like, wait, so not like another bunny, but like a completely
different toy from a completely different company. The first one, this happened in November of last year. It was a teddy bear from Folo Toy that was even worse. It was giving instructions on how to light matches.
Oh my gosh. Literally like every parent's nightmare.
So the backlash on that one was so bad, they pulled all of their products.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, right? Surely they should pull the products if they haven't been able to fix it.
Yeah.
Now, I assume that they pulled the products, they apologized to everyone, they handled everything perfectly, and then came back with a safer version, right?
Sure didn't. Nope. They came back to market 2 weeks later after what they called a safety audit, and they're still using the same OpenAI models. So once again, this is all coming back to OpenAI, which is going to be increasingly become a problem for them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, they're going to get the backlash, but it feels like the company that's building the toy needs to be putting guardrails and safety parameters specific to their toy because they're the ones launching this, right?
Well, I think this actually kind of comes back to the conversation that we had with Rich before Christmas. It's very difficult to put guardrails on these things, isn't it? That
Mhm.
was the whole concern with some of the Disney IP, is that it's
And that they
very
degrade over
easy.
time, right?
Yeah, well, that's exactly it, because you're absolutely right. The LLMs are inherently unpredictable in long conversations, and that is something that OpenAI has absolutely talked about. The longer you talk to it, the more likely it is to say something completely unhinged. That's just a feature of how these models work.
I would hope that OpenAI, while they're, I don't probably legally not responsible, like I would hope they would try to diagnose like the chain of events or the chain of conversation that got there because
Yeah,
I mean that just doesn't even make sense, right?
I know. But anyway, I think the moral of the story on this is maybe don't give your kids an AI powered toy. Literally give them anything else. Right. So that is it for today. We covered the AI bubble and kind of came to the conclusion that it's not a clear cut is going to burst or isn't going to burst. It's more about kind of where the real value lies with AI
Mhm.
versus where the hype is, because they are very different things.
Yeah, and we'll continue to monitor what we talked about with Rich, where perhaps these announcements just keep pushing the bubble out,
Yeah.
which actually could make the pop or the burst even worse.
If you want to dig any deeper on what we've talked about, we'll have all the CES announcements in the show notes.
Mhm. And also, we'll put links to those two books that Rich
Yes.
mentioned. I know I'll be taking a look at both of those. I think they provide some interesting comparisons or contrarian views. So definitely something to take a look at. But if you've been watching the market closely and you have a perspective on this bubble, we'd love to hear about you. Come tell us we're wrong about something.
Yeah.
We want some of these contrarian views. We
I was
want to
gonna
create
say,
that
let's
dialogue.
let's start a fight in the comments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tell us where we're wrong. Like, love to hear it. I get some anecdotal bits here from friends now and again, but would love to get more of the audience engaged.
Absolutely. And if you read the books, let us know. You can drop us a line at hello
Mhm.
at earlyadopter.ai. And remember, there's no E in adopter.
And if this episode, made you start thinking about the bubble in a unique way, or, potentially, where AI is heading, subscribe to wherever you're listening. We're also on YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, at early underscore adopter without the E on all of them. So, subscribe wherever you look at podcasts or videos.
Kyle, I will see you next week.
Yes. See you next week, Jess. Thanks to everyone for listening.
Bye.